All right, I think I'm starting to develop a little self-confidence. Hopefully not too much. Specifically about what? Well, three different areas. One, since I've been working very hard getting back into martial arts, including swordsmanship, Japanese and Chinese swordsmanship, and yes, my exploration of HEMA, this is definitely improving, getting stronger. Now, I did suffer an injury to the left arm, and I'm having to rehab that one as well. Talk about that another time. But yeah, this has been really good physical therapy for me. So feeling pretty good about that. The other thing I'm feeling pretty confident about is in my exploration of HEMA, all the potential weapons out there, what I like. Now, while I am really enjoying and learning a lot from my study of rapier, Mike really likes his cut and thrust sword. So side sword, back sword, and I do tend to lean more towards swords, well, with more hand protection. Yes, I am working with arming swords. Now, when it comes to longsword, I'm really enjoying longsword, and there is definitely a lot of crossover to my practice of Japanese-style swordsmanship, but I just don't get the opportunity to go out and use those swords outside as much as I would like. So I'm spending a lot more of that time I've talked about in other videos where I can just get up during my workday and you know, put in a couple of minutes here and there handling a sword indoors. Thrusting swords, including the rapier, as long as I have room, reach to do the thrusting, yeah, I don't need much more room than that. I could do it in a hallway, for instance. Swords that require more of a cutting stroke, yeah, the room gets a bit tight. So blades that are over 30 inches, 31 inches are a little bit too extreme for that. Sometimes even that's too long. So, in that vein, we get into the third area where I've developed some confidence. I've done a couple of projects recently, getting back into, well, a little bit of custom work on blades, including sometimes fairly significant reshaping, reprofiling. And I feel like, again, I'm getting pretty confident about it. So that led me to, well, where we are today. I decided to take a risk on something I was very, very, very wary about. And it turns out I probably shouldn't have been, but maybe I needed to be here first. What the hell am I talking about? Well, I like the back sword. I like the side sword. But what I've been seeing in terms of basket hilt broadswords, most of them looked just a little too heavy and unwieldy for where I was at. But one came up that was a very attractive, not only attractive sword, but an attractive deal. And I figured, well, if it didn't work out for me weight and balance wise, I could probably fix it. But I don't think I'm going to necessarily have to fix it, at least not much at all. And that would be, well, the spoiler's in the title. The Cold Steel Scottish broadsword. Okay, so first I'll do the sit down and then I'll do the stand-up handling. But this showed up on my doorstep late last night. I guess that's where I am in the UPS delivery rotation. So I got to handle it, clean off the goo. Yeah, it came packed in goo last night. I spared you the unboxing because I just personally find it kind of boring to watch people struggle with unwrapping something. Let's see how it actually looks out of the box and in hand. So that's where we're starting this morning. I did take it out and do some preliminary cutting with it. I haven't had a lot of time. It's been a busy day already. But I wanted to give you some initial impressions because there is at least one change I'm going to make to the sword. And it's not the change I expected to make. Well, kind of. What am I talking about? Let's look at the general stats. 31-inch blade, which is a really nice length for me. I can certainly use it indoors if I want to. At the base, 1.5 inches. So I thought it'd be a little bit broader, but that's actually not bad. But the big thing is you're talking about their 1055 steel, which is what Cold Steel commonly uses. But in many ways, I will compare this sword to the Cold Steel English backsword. And one of the things about that backsword, well, I really like the way that backsword handles, the way it feels, the way it moves, and the way it cuts. But the blade is, well, it's ugly. As I've mentioned in that and other videos I've done on that sword, I think they went a little insane with the buffing wheel. They did put a couple of fullers in it, and then they just buffed it all blurry and muddy and put this mirror chrome bumper finish on it that I'm still thinking about what I'm going to do about changing, because it's the one thing I don't like about the sword. The blade looks cheap, even though it really works well. This one, on the other hand, again, I was a little worried, but as you can see, it's got a triple fuller that runs about 2/3 of the length. And yes, a defined diamond cross-section. That's a little bit oval. It's not totally flat edge planes, a little bit, but at least it's got that diamond cross-section. But yeah, everything is pretty clean. And yeah, they machine buffed it, but they left a little bit of satin left to the texture, so it's not quite so chrome looking. So that's nice. Other thing about it right out of the box is it did come sharpened, and cold steel, one of the things I mentioned in other videos, swords that they get from India versus China. The ones that they get from China, like the long swords, they don't tend to have that secondary edge grind. They tend to be razor sharp out of the box. The ones from India, yeah, they put a secondary edge grind on it, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's, well, not so good. This is where I plan to potentially do some work on the sword. But this one, out of the box, it's not bad. It's not a massive or very blunt edge grind. I did take it out and do some cutting on some cardboard. It did pretty good. Not fantastic. I can improve it. But out of the box, I'm impressed. Now, it's only sharpened for the top 2/3. They left the fort blunt, which is historically accurate, and also something I'm familiar with, not just from European swords, but from Chinese gen, especially the Qing Dynasty style. They would leave the first third blunt for, yeah, parrying, and potentially also putting your hand on blade if you wanted to. So I'll probably leave that. Blade, good. Let's take a look at flex. Like I said, I did some cutting and some thrusting, and it doesn't really flex much in the thrust. One of the things you might see, though, is in the bend, it's a little bit more in the middle than I'd like, about right here, but then so is, well, the back sword. So again, very, very familiar, and I haven't had any problem with that either. Good, sturdy, solid sword that I put to a lot of use, and that one's held up really, really well. I expect this will do the same. But one of my major concerns, and why I was thinking I'd probably have to do significant changes to it, different specs I was reading on different sites, and what I consider comfortable swords, at least for me and my current condition. I have some swords in the 2.5-ish, 2 3/4-ish pounds range. I consider those easy swords to use. They're very handy, they're very maneuverable, very quick. And then I've got swords in the 3+ pound range. So around 3 1/4 pounds. I try to stay away from 3.5. But there were some specs on this that said it was 3.5 pounds with a pretty far forward balance point. So I was thinking, yeah, it was on sale. I got it from Amazon for about $200. If it's good and solid like the back sword, it's a good foundation to work with. I could reprofile it, turn it into something that works for me. But I don't think I'm going to have to do much to it. I might have to just appleseed that edge a little bit more for cutting. But the weight on this thing is 3 pounds 4 ounces. So towards slightly the top of my comfort zone. But the balance point is 3 1/4 inches off the guard. And I'll do a handling demonstration here in a second. But for me, that's pretty nice. Take a look at that again in a second. But let's look at the hilt first, then we'll look at the scabbard. Alright, so they did a really nice deep bluing on the basket. And it has a heart theme. And then it is lined with this felt-covered leather that's pretty thick. And I was thinking one thing I might do is take it out, but I've noticed is there's a lot of space open at the top of that shell. It does give some good protection. One of the weird things I've noticed is it's kind of an echo chamber. So every little movement of my hand in here just echoes the sound of that back at me really loud. It's an odd phenomenon. Anyway, kind of trivial. The grip is rayskin wrapped in wire, and it's exactly the same as the back sword. So that's very familiar to me, and I really like the grip on the back sword. I did have to sand off some of the roughness of it, make it a little bit more comfy for my delicate hands, and yeah, that did wind up being, you know, some nice rayskin under there. But yeah, I really like that grip, so this one immediately very familiar. It's certainly about, you know, 1/2 3/4 pound heavier than the back sword, but again, I'll do maneuvering here in a second. Let's get to the end of this thing. nice, well, if you can see it. Gotta get this Muppet out of the way. Fairly nice conical pommel. Does have a little lanyard or tassel hole in the middle of it. And it's a threaded construction, so I can take it apart. I haven't done that yet. Do that in a little bit. Why? Because I've done some research on how historically authentic tassels are. They tend to be more parade or ceremonial, but this, especially if the sword winds up in this orientation, like wearing it, and I go to grab it, all this, well, Muppet winds up in the grip, and I've got to like keep pulling it out. So that's probably got to go. But I wanted to show you with the tassel on. I don't know. It's too much. Let's take a look at the scabbard. Very, very similar to the backsword scabbard, except, of course, they gave it a deeper blue to match the hilt. It's got the hook. Now, they did write cold steel on the hook, which is not on the backsword one. A little bit of branding there. Some people have complained about that it doesn't fit. Pretty much the same throat and shape, but they added these little kind of, no, it's a braid pattern. It's not braided, but these little extra leather bands. And yeah, it is a flexible scabbard. It's got those plastic liner inserts. So fit right now is snug, but I know this will start breaking in really nice, but not get loose enough to have the sword not be secure. So those are all positives. So I was worried I'd have to reprofile the entire blade. I think all I really have to do is some work on the edge and de-Muppet it. Let's take a look at how it handles. Okay, there are many reasons why I don't have hair, and this is kind of one of them. Just having to mess with it. This is very low maintenance. But yeah, this certainly reminds me of one of the reasons why I never decided to go back. I actually used to have rock star hair when I was young. Looked like a combination between Jim Morrison and maybe, if you guys remember, John Cougar before he was John Mellencamp. Yeah, that kind of wavy locks down to here. Okay, anyway. Memories. Now I can't even imagine having that kind of stuff on my head, and I certainly don't want it on my sword, so that's going to have to go. But handling, yeah, I'm kind of surprised, and maybe it's just because I've been doing so much training. Now, I have been studying some of the classics and watching the HEMA channels. I've been reading George Silver, and I just got my hands on Donald McBain's book, and I highly recommend it, especially for his life story. That's entertaining, pretty outrageous. But he's got some pretty interesting things to say about his advice and favorite techniques and guards and things that I'm finding pretty appealing and useful. But as a cut and thrust sword with a lot of hand protection. The other thing that backsword is lacking, and also my Hanway Cromwell, these protective rings, which, yeah, they definitely beef up the guard, and I've seen it demonstrated that you could use those to catch an opposing blade in the bind. So yeah, really nice in parrying and handling, cutting. I'm still getting used to it a little bit. Like I said, it's just a little bit towards my heavier range. Thrusting, finding the point is actually really nice for me. So I'm not having too much trouble with that. And it's not overly heavy. It's balanced just pretty well. So I'm really feeling like I can handle this fairly comfortably and not struggle with it too much. So I would have to say, so far, initial impressions, I'm pretty impressed with it. So, do a little work on it and then give you a quick update. Okay, step one, no more Muppet. Now, I'll post some pictures so I don't have to bore you watching me unscrew the thing, but the hole in this piece at the end does make a handy little feature. I could stick something through it, use it as kind of a wrench, and you've got basically, this piece is a separate, kind of a 3/4 of an inch long, kind of a sleeve nut, and then this cone piece is separate, and then under that is a hex nut. Now, removing the Muppet did leave a gap in there, so I think I'm going to make a leather washer just to fill that space. It might add a little bit more shock absorbing, but it didn't affect how tight everything else is. It's just kind of a visual issue for me. Okay, this has got to go. This is probably distracting both of us way too much. Again, reasons why I don't have stuff on my head. But let's take a look at the out of the box edge really quick. I mean, it's not horrible. It's a little jagged, but I mean, it cuts. Can't complain too much about that. But let me see if I can make it better. All right, let's see how it did, or how it did, as the case may be. Yeah, I think there's some improvement there. Not that it was terrible out of the box, but what did I do? Well, took it out on the big old belt sander with some wet dry sandpaper and started at 400 grit and worked my way up to 1,000 grit, just really gentle apple seating, kind of like you do on, well, a normal size knife sharpener like a work sharp, but I find working blades this big and bulky on my work sharp to be awkward, and yeah, it just kind of makes it easier and saves those little belts on the work sharp if I do this on the bigger sander. So I've developed a touch that allows me to use my giant sander as a sharpener. And this turned out pretty well. It took me, well, maybe about an hour. I also put a little preliminary leather gasket in here. I don't know if it's necessary, but I was thinking, well, maybe this cone piece, it could be sharp. My wrist hasn't banged into it yet, but it might. Speaking of, well, my hand banging into stuff, it might be my brace, but you can already see in there, the finish on the inside of the leather is, yeah, it flakes off really easily. I'm going to have to keep some leather dye handy. The rest of it, though, is pretty sturdy, and actually the edges, that's rolled over and stitched in fabric, so that's probably not going to come off very easily, but inside the basket, yeah, that scrapes right off. So it's a little annoying, a little unsightly on the inside. On the outside, the felt covering seems to be fine. So, final impression of my initial impression. For the money. Now, like I said, I got this for a screaming deal at about $200, but usually what I've seen it go for is around maybe $250, as high as $275, depending on where you go. I think it's a shave under $250 at Cult of Athena right now. So consider that. Do I think it's worth it? Just even straight up out of the box before I did anything to it? Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a nice, attractive, functional sword. And pretty darn tough, at least my initial impressions. And not as scary in terms of handling as I thought it was going to be, at least for me. Your mileage may vary, but 3 pounds, 4 ounces with a 3 1/4 inch point of balance and a pretty comfortable grip, again, at least for me. Yeah, I think this sword is a lot handier than I expected it to be. Happy with my purchase. So, I hope this initial review, I do promise to do some action shots soon when I can get my equipment outside, show you how it moves and performs and cuts heavier stuff. But until then, let's get that conversation going. If you are interested in getting a sword like this, if you already have a sword like this, have a different kind of sword like this, let's get that conversation going. Again, those always tend to inspire more videos, so keep it coming. Love the conversations. Otherwise, as usual, thanks for watching, following, subscribing, and I do hope to see you back for more.